Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. It's the top of the hour, and I don't want to take too much of your time if you guys have other things that you might need to get done today. So welcome to kind of a new type of presentation. We're doing kind of a training session. What I'd love you guys to do is during the presentation, I'll give you a moment at different parts to even look on your system if you have access and make sure that you can get to these screens, that you don't have any issues with them, that I'll be doing everything on my sample system. It does happen to be 2016, the version that I'm going to be running, but you do not have to have that version. And can I have somebody that just joined go ahead and hit mute on your phone because I'm hearing feedback?
Hi, yeah, this is Caesar. I'll do that right now.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's great. I'm Aubrey Gilman, and I am a senior consultant over at Collins. If I haven't met you personally, I'm a bit surprised because I've worked there about 20-something years now. But I assist in just doing some training classes. I try to get the word out to you guys for any type of free presentations, Microsoft presentations, all of our conferences that we attend, and then I do assist in some day-to-day support once in a while and run some of the projects. So today we're going to be focusing on what you guys need to do to get your 1099s out. Depending on the version that you're using, there are definitely different steps that you can go through and different screens that you can access, so I'm going to cover all of them no matter what version that you're on. And we're going to just jump right in here. Let me make sure I can get to this. In case you didn't know, I do work out of a remote office over in Bend, Oregon with my husband, Mike Gilman, who works in support. And so I know that California has seen some tremendous amount of rain in the last few weeks, and we have seen about that in snow. So we had about 50-some inches in the last 5 weeks. So we are having fun in the snow, but also going through some craziness with school delays and days off and things like that. So hopefully everybody is feeling this winter as well as we are. We are going to be going through not only how to process 1099s, but then where you can get some other resources and get your questions answered. So I'm going to just jump right in. First of all, when you are in Dynamics with any of the newer versions, starting with about 2013, I think, is when you started having the ability to have a connect area in the system. And what I mean by that, I'm just going to swap over to my Dynamics and go to my home page. And one of the areas that I just mentioned here is the connect area. And so let me minimize this other area for myself. It could look something like this. It could be over in this area for you. But basically what it does is it just links out to the Microsoft websites. And why I brought this one up is if you click on here, when it says getting ready to go to year end, you would see all of the articles that Microsoft has put out on year end processing. And in particular, what I wanted to point out was the payables management one. And it goes through just the changes that I'm going to go through today and some of the other resources that are available to you. So if you don't have that on your system, two things. One, a bit careful because, you know, if you don't have access to the internet from your login, then you're going to get an error instead of getting a connect. So if your company prohibits logging into the internet from your workstation, then that's going to be an issue. And it may just slow it down as it's kind of going through some of these articles and blogs and things that it has available to you when you're logging in, not at any other point in time. It's not taking away resources. But if it wasn't on yours, if you went over to customize this page and then you see this little connect, that is where you turn it on and off. So if I had had it off and I refreshed my screen, then I wouldn't see that at all in my home area. So I just come out here, do connect, and then the next time that my home screen refreshes, you're seeing a delay here because it's going out and reading it just like it would when it first logs in, and it's going out to the internet and trying to get whatever information is accessible at that time. So that's the first thing I want to just show, is that we do have resources available to you. Let me go back out here. The other things that I did want to mention is I won't be posting this session on our own blog, like Colin's computing blog, but I have other sessions that were free to all users. Okay, I just showed you that, so I don't need to stop and talk about that. Let's just chat for a moment about what the changes are to 1099s this year. So when each year comes, Microsoft puts out an update for Microsoft Dynamics GP, and depending again on what version, you may or may not even have that accessible to your company because it no longer has any updates for like 2010, so you'd have to be to get any update. And so the big change around 1099s was that there were just one little change on the 1099 interest boxes, which I'll show you, and then something on the 1096s. So let me go to that. Beyond that, there weren't a lot of year-end changes at all around anything, you know, payroll or 1099s or AP or even fixed assets. There was just the one little thing. But for 1099 interest, really the only thing that changed is that this field was labeled. So if you didn't do your year-end update as in code, that's okay this year because it just would expect that there's a blank box, but it's still there. So the boxes shouldn't change. The miscellaneous and the dividend layouts are exactly the same. So it's just the interest one that changed, and all it has was the label put on the actual form, so no format changes. Then for the 1096, there were some changes. So if you are printing 1096s from Dynamics, you might want to try this out, because what happened was all of these little boxes were made a little bit smaller to make room for these 3 boxes on the end. So we just want to make sure that if you're printing these out and some of these boxes need to be checked, that it's still lining up for you. So those are the 2 changes, kind of just talking about them. When you close your year end in payables, it used to be that you really had to pay attention to when you printed 1099s and when you closed your year. That's no longer the case. There's really only one screen that is affected, and only the smart lists that run off that table that's affected if you close your year at different times and not right at the end. So let's just talk about for 1 minute, when you close your year end in payables, the calendar year-end close only moves the 1099 amounts, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. The fiscal year-end option closes all the rest of the figures. So let me show you the screen. So if you were to look at a vendor and you were looking at a summary of a vendor, these summary figures, and you pull up a fiscal year, it would show you what you billed, what was billed to you, what you paid out, terms, all these other things. So if you're running the system and you select a fiscal year, you select your year and hit calculate, it's going off the fields that are part of your detail. So it doesn't matter when you close. But what it is going to show you is year to date versus last year to date versus life to date. And it's going to calculate those. However, if you go into this screen, so the Vendor Yearly Summary Inquiry screen, and you select the view that's called Amounts Since Last Close, then those are going to directly reflect on that day when you pushed the amounts over, what were your amounts. So if I ran it today and I happen to have this much in my billed and paid, it would just move those figures over to last year. So that's really the only thing I would caution you against, is just don't use that. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So if I go into my payables area and I go into a vendor summary, and I'm seeing, here's my vendor, and I go over to yearly. When you open the screen, the default show amount since last close. I'm suggesting, and I wish we could just take this out, to be honest, that you don't use that, and you use either calendar or fiscal year end and then hit calculate, and it'll calculate the amounts for you. If I change that to 2016 and I hit calculate, it'll show me again. So I'm suggesting that you either use calendar or fiscal year depending on when your fiscal year ends. But if you're specifically looking for things like 1099, then you're going to do calendar, put the year in, and hit calculate. So just rule of thumb, don't hit amount since last close, because that's physically on the day that I ran my closing what was the amounts. And so you'll see here in my sample system, I haven't run the year end close for payables. And it's not a big deal as long as I'm just selecting a calendar year and hitting calculate. So I can go all the way back to even, I think I've got like 2014. Well, life to date. So it's saying that in 14 I didn't have any figures, but I still have a life to date. So hopefully you guys understand what I'm talking about there, and I drilled that in a lot enough. Okay, let's go back here. So when you do close your year end, if you're closing it, here's just a recap of what I had told people during our year end closing webcast. Is just you post your transactions for the previous year, you put your new transactions in a new batch, you don't have to post them right away, and then the figures all move over. You can run some reports, and then you can do your 1099 processing. But again, because the system looks at the actual detail, you don't have to do these in any particular order. So let's really focus now on just 1099s. So what am I talking about? Well, I have to have certain vendors that I've marked as 1099 vendors, and when I pay them, the amount that I'm paying them on invoices that were 1099 applicable is what I'm supposed to report to the government. So if I go into my vendor maintenance card and I click on options, I'm going to see that in that screen I've got a tax type of miscellaneous, dividend, or interest. And whatever one I pick, the 1099 box that it goes to is going to be whatever it defaults to for that type. So miscellaneous always defaults to 7. I think interest is 1, dividend is something else. So I'll show you that in a minute. But if I don't have a vendor set up as 1099, then none of the rest of this that we're going to talk about will work, right? So we want to make sure our vendors are 1099. So what's a good way that I can check to see that my vendors are going to show up in my list? Well, I suggest that you create a smart list. So I'll go in and I'll show you, but what my smart list usually does is I do a smart list and I say not only do I want to see the vendors that are 1099, but for me, I've used a field in my system, user defined 2, to remind myself whether I have like a W-9 on file with them. And then I also want to make sure that the tax ID is filled in, because that's the field that prints on the 1099s. So let me make sure that this is, yeah, we'll swap over. So if I go into my vendor cards, just to recap, and I go into options, then I'm going to see that I've either got not a 1099 or one of the 3 1099s, right? So when I do a smart list, I'm going to say, give me all of those vendors that are not a 1099, if that makes sense, because I want all 3 of miscellaneous, dividend, and interest. So I'm going to do a double negative there. And then, as I said, if I had hit miscellaneous, it goes to 7. If I had selected dividend, it goes to 1. If I select interest, it goes to 1. If I put it back to miscellaneous, it goes to box 7. Now, for a particular vendor, I can change that. So if there are particular things you need to consider for a certain vendor, you can always go and change that. So now let's go out to Smart List and look at purchasing. And I've got like 1099 vendors, right? So in this 1099 vendor smart list, all I've done is I've said, like I'll kind of start over. So I've started with all my vendors. And I've said, okay, maybe I don't need to see all these other fields, so I can remove a few of these. And all I want is to add where the 1099 type shows, and I want to also do my tax ID field. So instead of scrolling down, if I just click in here and hit a T, it'll go all the way down to my T's. I'm going to add tax ID number. And then I also said that for me, I might want to track user defined too for all of those vendors that I've actually got like a W-9 on file. Okay, so you can see that I've got some tax ID numbers. Now, the other thing that I need to do is to say now my 1099 type is not equal to not a 1099 vendor, right? So that way it'll show me all three of the other types. So if I hit OK, I can have it here. Now, I might have two of these, right? So maybe that's fine. I want to see my 1099 vendors. But in reality, I already know that these are all right. So maybe I only want to see those. So I'm going to take this a step further, where my tax ID number is equal to blank, because that's going to tell me that I probably want to go into each of these vendors, go into the options, and maybe I've put it in the wrong field. So maybe it needs to go there and I put it in tax registration number. And so now I would see that when I refresh this list, that top one is going to go away because now I've got something in that field. Okay, and I can always go back and go, oh, let me see that. I can blink this out. And I can see all of my vendors again and what the tax numbers are. Okay, so if I did that though, let's put where the tax ID number is blank. And then I save this as a favorite, right? So maybe I want to save this, and these are going to be 1099 vendors with missing tax ID. And I can show it for just me or for anybody that is logged into our system, our GP system. And I want to add a favorite, but I also want to add it as a reminder. And what that means is it's going to go on my home page. And whenever this has a record greater than 0, it's going to show up on my home page, and I'm going to display it as a queue. And what this is going to do is it says, okay, you have this smart list, and if you have any records of this smart list, that means that you have 1099 vendors who are missing those tax ID numbers, and I want to warn you about it, right? So here, I'm going to go back to my home page, and now when I log in, I'll have this one here, 1099 vendors with missing tax ID. I've got 21 of those vendors. And if I click on it, it would bring me to that same smart list. And then, as I said, if I went into options and I moved that to tax ID, and then I refreshed, even from this home screen, you'll see that number go from 21 to 20. It keeps putting it over here, and that's all, to 20. Okay? So hopefully everybody followed that. If you didn't, please let me know. Hopefully you guys are there. I can see that people are attending. But okay, let's go back to the PowerPoint. So sometimes people run their 1099 edit lists, which I will cover in a moment, but then they ask me, why are my 1099 vendors not showing in my edit list? And that's because in your 1099 setup in your system, it's, at least for the 1099 miscellaneous type, the default is don't show me any unless there's at least $600 that I paid them this year. So if you want that to be lower and you want to print 1099s even though they're below $600, then we would go to these screens. So let me show you where that is. And you may not, care to change this, but just in case you thought you were going a little cuckoo, under the purchasing setup. So you'll notice that I'm using my menus a lot. It's the same thing if I went to tools, sorry, not there. Setup, see how hard this is, purchasing, and then payables. So that field is the same as if I just used my menus and went under Setup and Payables and clicked there, but I don't have to get my mouse just right. So I tend to use the menus. So in your Payables setup, there's a little option here, 1099 setup. And here is where those amounts are held for how much it has to meet, what the threshold is to meet in order to print the 1099s. So you're welcome to change those in your own system if you wanted to make those lower. Okay, let's go back. So that's what this screen is, and I will also send you the PowerPoint that I used. So now let's talk about, okay, we've got our vendor set up. Now I've got transactions in the system. How did they get there, right? How did these actually get into the 1099 bucket? And maybe it seems really obvious to you, but basically I'm entering an invoice for a vendor that was set to 1099, and when I enter it, you might not even notice that when you put the purchasing amount in, it automatically defaults that full amount to a 1099 amount, and when that amount is paid is when it's getting, you know, a 1099 paid amount, and that's what we're reporting. And if you hit the little red or blue arrow next to the 1099 amount, then that tax type window comes up, and you could say, well, this invoice is applicable to this kind of tax, so miscellaneous dividend or interest, and what box it's going into. So what I'm showing you here is that you can actually modify that when you're inputting invoices. So for some reason, if I were inputting an invoice for a 1099 vendor, but I'm going to say not this time, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So let's just say I have this invoice that I'm putting in. It's for Aaron Fitz. It's, you know, document number may prepay, something like that, and it's for $500. So because this vendor is a 1099 vendor, as soon as I put that amount in, this went over here. So I can say this amount is not applicable, or I can change it and say only $50 of this is applicable, or I can say this is applicable but to a different box. So I just wanted to let you know that that's really when this all kicks in, is at the time that you're doing an invoice. So we'll just save that. I don't really need to post it. I think you get the idea. Okay, so now that's happened in your system, and you've paid some of those invoices. And so how do I know what is going to print? So I want to show you a few of the reports in the system. The first one is the period analysis report. So if I print this report, it's going to show me for each of my vendors, for each of the periods of whatever date range I run, it's going to show me basically all those summary figures that were in that inquiry screen, but one of them is the 1099 amount. And just as a reminder, if you're using one of the newer versions of Dynamics, you can email items out to yourself. So I'm going to go to Reports Purchasing Analysis Period. So here I could go Reports Purchasing Analysis and Period, but I'm going to go Reports Analysis and then Period. And I'm going to say print everything from year 2016. So all I did was say year 2016 in each of these and hit insert. Okay, and I'm going to say show me for my calendar year. Now, if I wanted, I could say I'm going to email this. I have to sign on to my email system. But when I do that, it would open it up, and I could say I'm going to email this to somebody. Maybe it's not me. And I can either have this report sent as an attachment or actually embedded in the body of the message, but I'll probably send an attachment. And I can even say, you know, this is the vendor report that I told you about. Okay, so if I wanted to do that, then I could go ahead, pull up that one that I was just using, and I could email it. And it would directly email that report. Now, I don't have email up and running. I'm just going to, this is on a VM, so I have to sign back in. And I purposely wasn't. Let's let that go for a second so you're not reading all my emails, but we'll give it a second and see when it comes up. But I'll get an email in a moment, and it'll be an email of that report. Or I could have just printed it to screen. Okay, so here's Aaron Fitz, and it's only showing me the periods that I do have data for. Okay, so here's all the different vendors. And that way I can at least see what I expect to appear. And, oh, that's interesting. Oh, I typed my email address wrong. So you get the idea here. I'll do it one more time. Oh, except my email options is going to send to the same one, so I'm a little silly. Let's fix that. How about email? All right, so it'll come up in just a moment. So that's just one report that you can get. And what it is showing you the same information that you're going to get in different parts here of your system. I'm just seeing if that's going to come up. We'll give it a minute. So we'll go to the next one, and then I'll come back. If you wanted to see detail, right, you wanted to see all of the checks that you wrote and what invoices it paid, then you could run a reports, purchasing, posting journal, check journal, right, because it's when the invoices are paid is when this is getting updated. So then you would be able to see, okay, here are the checks that I wrote to these vendors, and then here are the invoices. So if you really wanted to go and see the detail of every single check that you posted and what invoices they paid, and then I could figure out what the 1099 amounts were supposed to be, then these are the reports that I would suggest you run, are the check journals. Let's go back for a moment, see if that printed. There we go. Here is the one that I told you about, and then depending on what I set up, I would get a different, text or HTML or whatever format I want, but that's the same report. So just to show you that you want to use the system, sometimes you don't need to send a report to printer. You can email it to yourself, and you can see that same data. So let's go back, and I was showing you, okay, I know how to see the data in my system. Obviously, I could also go and see, look at each vendor and inquire on them and see the history in all of the inquire screens. But now, what if I have that information and I want to modify it? So first I'm going to talk about the new versions and what you can do. And then I'm going to go back and say, if you're running something older than 2013, here's also how you could do it. So the first thing is, starting in 2013, there were several new options. One is that you could actually have a different address for your 1099 printouts to go to. So when you print your 1099s, maybe your vendor has a primary address and then they have a 1099 address. So it's just pretty obvious in the vendor maintenance window under 1099, you could just put another address ID and create another address. And so you'll notice that when you print a 1099 for that vendor, it won't print the primary. It would print whatever you have for the 1099. The other thing is that we've got all these different box numbers that were now added. So previous, we really only had the ability to post into, box 1 for dividend and interest and box 7 for miscellaneous. But now you've got all the different box numbers specific to a tax type, dividend, miscellaneous, or interest. And then I'll show you the other information. There are additional fields on the 1099 details window. And then we'll go into the two options you have for editing the 1099 transactions themselves, either in bulk or individually. And then the other thing that happened is that there's a new 1096 form that you can also print, not just the 1099. So first, let me just quickly go over to the 1099 details. I'm going to close some of these other screens. That was where I wanted to go. And under purchasing, there's 1099 details, right? So in here, you have all of these other fields that maybe you want to use on your 1099s or you needed. Otherwise, you're going to be pulling up a vendor. It's going to show you what they're set up as, and then you can display, you know, what the figures were for any particular month. So here I have $700 in 2016. You have, as I said, these numbers here if you wanted to, numbers and boxes that you could change, and then I could modify these amounts. However, this is how you would do it in the old way. If I modify these amounts, if you run reconcile, it's going to zero them out. So I could modify them manually. But in the new version, you've got two options. So first is the edit 1099 transaction information, and it's kind of hidden, or it seems like it's hidden, because you go to the transaction purchasing menu and it's way at the bottom, and it's edit 1099 information. What that is going to allow you to do is by vendor, you can look up all of their 1099 or debit or credit transactions and go through and change these amounts, the tax type, or the box number that these print in. And this has nothing to do with the invoice itself as far as your financials. It just has to do with 1099s. So it's just those fields when we were inputting the invoice on the right-hand side where it said, you know, here's my 1099 amount and here is where I'm going to put the information. That's the information that it's changing. It's not changing any account number that it posted to, any dates that it posted to, nothing else. So let's go to what I'm talking about. So here's transactions. And so as I said, you start looking and you're like, where is it? And it's way at the bottom, edit 1099 transaction information. Same thing as if you were here. It's literally way at the bottom. Okay, so you pull up this screen, you pull up a vendor, it's going to show you all of the invoices that were applicable to 1099s, and if not, you could do all my debit because I had a couple of documents that were not 1099 applicable, or I could do my credit transactions, just so you can see. So I've got these invoices, and I can change that it's applicable to a certain tax type. It should go into a different box number, or how much of this invoice is really 1099 applicable. If I wanted to see more about that invoice, I could zoom down and see it, so I can see what it originally was posted to. Okay, but otherwise, if I wanted to change it, I could say, yeah, for this one, it was, let's just say that this one was only $500 applicable, and this one I wanted to go to a different box number, but it was still applicable. As I hit process, it's going to go ahead and process this. So this is for one vendor at a time, and you're specifically selecting the transactions that you're going to change. Okay, so this is not for if I forgot to set up a vendor as 1099. That's a different place. This is specifically selecting a vendor and then saying, you know, hey, some of these were supposed to be 1099 and some of them were not. All right, so let's go back for a moment and look at the other options. So I said, what if I had a vendor that was set up as one 1099 type, it was supposed to be another? Or what if I had a vendor, they weren't 1099, and now I realized that they were 1099 applicable. So this is where you're going to go. You're going to go under Utilities this time. Okay, so Utilities and update 1099 information. You can update just a vendor and not their transactions, just transactions but not the vendor card, or both. So I would assume that maybe you probably want both. And let's pull up this one in particular, and let's say that they were all, and I'm making them dividend and So that's what I have defaulted here. I could have changed it. If I do change this, this is important. If I do change this, then make sure that you still have this selected, because what I've seen before is if I change the type up here, see how that goes away? So just make sure that whatever you're changing, that your options are still selected down below. So now if I hit process, I didn't really look at anything about that vendor. The system did it for me. It was not a 1099 vendor. Now it is, and all of these transactions now have the full amount, so it's assuming the full amount of these invoices are going to be 1099 applicable. Okay, so hopefully you guys got that. So the update 1099 is for when you really just want to do like a bulk mode. Maybe you set up all of your like dividend ones as interest or interest as dividend. So I could have said, you know, if they're dividend, make them interest, and I could do a whole set of vendors at the same time. You know, or maybe I wanted to do like everybody that was a certain type. So you have a lot of choices here in what you can filter out. But for the most part, I think it's probably that you meant to set up a vendor and you set them up as either the incorrect type or you didn't set them up as 1099. So now you can go back and set them up. All right, next. If you're running GP 2013 prior to that, so 2010, then you don't have those last two screens that I showed you, right? So how am I going to do it? Now you can also use this method for version 2013, 2015, 2016, but you see here in the red when I say warning, 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 if you run reconcile for your payables, it's going to zero these out because it's going to look back at your detailed transactions, see what was posted in your transactions for 1099 amount and what boxes and all that, and make this match what it said before. So just if you do these changes, just realize don't run your don't run your reconcile before you run your 1099s. So I already went to this screen before, but you could either go to cards purchasing and then 1099 details, or I'll show you the next one, that you could go to purchasing cards summary, yearly, and then hit this blue arrow. So I'm going to show you both of those. So if I'm looking at my vendors, and let's say that I started with the summary, right? I'm looking at my vendor here, maybe it's this vendor, I'm looking at my yearly, I'm looking at, you know, here's what I ran. Actually, let's go to, yeah, this one. And I'm looking at a particular calendar year. Then I'm going to see the blue button. So a couple things. Notice that it's not available in amounts since last close, and it's not available in fiscal year because 1099s have everything to do with calendar year. I could calculate 2016 because that's the year that I'm looking at, and I could see, oh, that's not right. It was supposed to be the full 1,000 for that invoice because I know that I went and changed it. So if I'm in a previous version, then I could go ahead and change this, right? Because it's in 2013, it's saying that's not the way you should do it. But here, if I'm in 1099 details, it's the same screen. I pick a year, and I should have said, like, I pick a month, and before I was looking at somebody else, and then I can change it. So the summary screen going that way is in the inquire mode. The 1099 details here is in the entry mode. So here then I could put, okay, this was supposed to be $600, not some funky amount. But if I do that and I run reconcile, the next time I pull this up, it's going to say the same thing. It's going to go back to what it was. So here's 2017, here's 2016. Oh, did I just pull up the wrong vendor? I think I just pulled up. there we go. Does everybody get that? So if you're running prior to 2013, then I would say go into the summary screen first, because in reality, you're going to change it there because you don't even have the 1099 details screen. So it's the summary, yearly, change it to calendar, and then you're going to change it either there or even it has a different summary screen or different details screen. It's just by period. It's like this one here. But it has the 1099 amounts. It's a different screen. You'll see it's a little bit different. I don't know if somebody, is anybody here that's prior to 2013 that they're running on 2010?
I am, yes.
Okay, so you might want to glance at this point at your system.
I did. I
Okay.
checked it. It's fine. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I didn't want to confuse you, but it looks a little different because there were some extra fields and things like that. Awesome. Okay, so you can change it, as I said, then print your 1099s. Just be super careful that if you run reconcile, you'll know that your changes have been wiped out, so you'll need to make them again if you haven't printed your 1099s. So now let's talk about, before I do that, we're going to talk about now printing the 1099s. Any questions so far? No. Okay, at least I know somebody's on the phone though. Okay, I wish that Microsoft would actually print the forms. The good news is that this year for the 2016 R2 release of Dynamics, they just brought in where they're printing W-2s with all the labels. And so what I'm hoping is that it means that maybe next year, if they do an update to 1099s, they'll actually print the labels like they do in the W-2s. So that's kind of, you know, a teaser that I'm hoping that they're going to come out with. But basically, you need pre-printed forms. You can either use like the laser stock where it's single feed, or you can use the old dot matrix style, which is continuous. But I wanted to bring that up because depending on which one you have, you need to select something different in the printing screen. But you need to go out and get your 1099 forms for the year that you're printing them. And, you know, you can reprint. If somebody wanted some form back from previous years, you might not have the physical form available, but you would still be able to print, sorry, I forgot I had a touch screen and I touched my screen here. You can still print them and it would give them the information. So if all they were looking for was the amount, I'll show you that you can really print any year you want. And then, as I mentioned, starting in 2013, you could also print the 1099s. So when we go into the screen, I know this is super busy, but I just wanted to remind you later, if you're looking at this PowerPoint, that you've got several things that you want to check. And I did put a screenshot of what it looks like in the old version because it's a bit different. So if you're in one of the newer versions, if you pull up this screen, it says, do you want to print the forms, or do you want to print, which means an edit list, which I'll show you. And so you're selecting which one you want to print, and then make sure you select which year you're printing it for. So if I'm printing for 2016, great, but I can go back and print prior years. And it's fine. It still has the data as long as you haven't run reconcile and you didn't change those amounts. Otherwise, it's just going to go look at the detail, summary records if you haven't done any reconciles, and print those amounts. You're going to need to select whether this miscellaneous interest or dividend. And then here's the point where I just said you're going to select whether it's single feed or continuous. Now, if you're in an older version, this up here is going to look different. It's only going to have the print button, and then off on the right-hand side, there's this little print icon. So that is for your edit list. So in the new versions, you have them here. In the old, you just have a print button on the left, and way over on the right, you'll have a little icon that stands for the edit list, and I'll show you both. And then with the newer versions at the bottom, you can also say that you want to print a 1096 form, and you would just select that, click that, go into the same screen. The first time you click 1099, this time you're selecting 1096. Oh wait, let me go right back. I forgot one thing on here. So remember that if you didn't modify the setup screens for the minimum amount, then for certain vendors, it may not print unless it's over $600. Now, dividend and interest are a little different. I've modified mine so much, I don't know that what I have is in my system is the default, but I know that they're different. They're not 600. I think some are 100 and some are zeros. Okay, the last thing is if your 1099 forms don't line up, I want you to check a couple of things. And first is, did you actually say these are single feed or continuous? Because maybe you have it set to continuous, so the first one looks like it's printing right, and then the other ones don't. And then the other thing is maybe you've modified the 1099 form that you're printing, and so maybe it'd be worth going back to the default because maybe you had a weird printer one year and you aligned it different. And then the last thing is that you could also, on your actual print setup, change your alignment a little bit and make sure that you have it set up that you're not making your margin bigger or smaller. So a few things to try, but I'll go ahead and I'll show you in my system kind of what you're doing. So this is under routines. So same thing as if I went tools and routines and purchasing and then print 1099, but for me I just click there. And the first thing is this payer's federal ID tax number. Now if I go to my company address, I see that I have that here. If I didn't, I could go ahead and modify it or create an address to print there. Under my company setup, at least I believe, because I didn't notice this before, should be all my tax numbers. So if I put my tax number in there, it would have printed on that, or it would have shown up in that screen. So, but it's okay if you want to just put it here, you can put it here, whatever your number is. And then you're going to select the year. I'm going to select whether it's miscellaneous, dividend, or interest. And as I mentioned, I'm going to change that probably to single feed if it's not continuous. And here, so let's show you the difference. Here's the print. This is the edit list. This is going to show me my 1099 vendors of the type that I selected. So in this case, it was miscellaneous. Sorry, I don't know if that makes it harder. So miscellaneous. And then it's going to basically tell me what it's going to print on there, whether they have their tax ID, whether I have their address, how much the 1099 amount was. So before you actually print your forms, you can just do a quick review to say, yep, that looks right, or no, I realize now I need to go and set up their tax ID number, or their address is different now. So that was just done by hitting the print, or in the older versions, the print on the right-hand side. Okay, any questions on that part? Same thing if I were doing interest or dividend. So it would just show I don't have much of interest in that year. I'm going to actually go back. Let's see. I think I had some. Maybe not, because I kept changing them. There we go. So I've got my interest for that year. And as I said, I could go back to different years. So this is just proving that, yeah, this was for 2014. And then same thing for dividend. I don't need to go through that. You guys get it. Okay, so let's then say I've got this set up for 2016. I have single feed, miscellaneous, and I'm going to print forms. So the first thing I would say is go put the forms in your printer. You could print these over and over again. So I'm going to print it to screen. So I could just print them once to blank paper just to see that it looks like it's going to line up. And if you're kind of looking at my sheet, you'll see that it looks like it's going to print 2 to a page, right? It's single feed, but 2 to a page. And my information is at the top. Here's my tax ID number, and then the Aaron Fitz, and I actually had, this is their tax ID number. I just wrote the word tax ID in there so I would know that that was Aaron Fitz tax ID. And then the amount, and the amount is going to print in, this is where box 7 is. So we'll look when I print different, or actually I must have been printing one of these in a different area because the 600 and 1500 are in different boxes. So I think I did change that one to print to like box 3 or 6. I think that was box 6. So you'll see that it's printing in different areas on the form. So let's do this once more for interest. And as I said, let's change that to a year that I have some detail for. And see if I had some. Yeah. And so you'll see that their dollar figures are in different boxes, right? And different amounts. And then as I mentioned, if you're printing these forms and you're actually printing to a printer, I might get an error, but if I had a printer, I would want you to say like pre-printed form options, here's the alignment. So this is where if it is printing like a little bit to the left, move them over a little bit. Right? If that's the only issue is that for some reason the margin is off, then you can try that before trying to modify the report. Otherwise, what I think that our support desk gets most of the time is that people are calling, they're printing these, and things are just not lined up. Maybe they haven't done any year-end closing in a while, and some of the boxes are different. And so we will go with you into your format if you don't want to do any kind of system update, and we'll make sure nobody else is in the system. But for each of the 1099s, right, I have a 1099 laser interest, miscellaneous dividend, and then I have the 1099 continuous interest, miscellaneous, and dividend. So I have 6 different reports in Dynamics that I could modify, and all I could do, if I needed to, is just push this over a little bit or pull these down. So it's not rocket science. We can do it. We'd rather mess around a little bit with the margins first. But if you need us to help you with modifying the format, we can do that. Okay.
Where were the margins at again? Sorry.
Oh, so here, I'll show you again once. Basically, when you go to print it to your printer, it's just like as if you were printing a Word document or something, right? So if I did print 1099s and I was printing my form to an actual printer, the new version, okay, I should say this too, this is within the newer versions, 2013 and forward, because now it pulls up the Word or the Microsoft Office print dialog, and so when I select my printer, depending on my printer, you could have printer preferences, okay, and then you can have like advanced, so it depends on your printer, but printer preferences, and then it could have some layouts. But what I did, my particular printer had the option of just pre-printed forms and alignment. So for me, as soon as I select my printer, look for this one right here, pre-printed form options, and then to move it across or down.
Perfect, thank you.
So if you were using an older version of Dynamics, then when you click whatever printer is selected as your default printer in Dynamics, it's already printing there, right? It's too late. So what you'll need to do is actually have to go into Control Panel before you open the screen, go into Control Panel, go into your printer options, find that printer and move the margins over in your printer setup. Because that's when you click on print forms, it's already going to whatever default printer you have. And I don't think that you're allowed to change your preferences at this point. You only get the option to hit OK to print. But if all of that fails, let us know and we can try to help you, or you can try it yourself as I mentioned, when you pull up your screen, it says, do you want to modify this report? And then notice this time it's the 1099 miscellaneous because I was printing dividend last time or interest or whatever. So this time if I'm going into my report writer, it's the 1099 miscellaneous layout. And then again, it's just, if I double clicked on this box, I would see that this is my box 1. If I double click on this one, it's box 2. So you kind of see which boxes, but I could really just pull them up or down or whatever it needs to be. And then we'd have to make sure that if you did modify that, that you give security to that modified report, just like you would any other report in your system. So I don't mean to be glossing over that, but you'd modify your report. So number 1, you don't want other people in your reports dictionary or using it when you modify it because you could corrupt it. Number 2, you want to save that and test out the layout. And then number 3, you want to make sure that you're giving security to whoever's printing the 1099s. And I do want to mention, not just Avalara, there are a couple of third-party products out there that will print your 1099s. Hopefully it's getting easier and easier to print 1099s in Dynamics, especially since, you know, we can modify the amounts, we can modify the layouts, we can reprint different years. Some of those things weren't true in the past. So if not, if you do want somebody to print them for you, Green Shades and Avalara both do 1099s. I know that as it gets closer to next Monday, when these things are due, companies will charge you a bit more for, you know, kind of an escalation of printing and sending, but you should be able to print them yourself. As I mentioned, most of the time I will go out on our blog and post the information about webcasts and links to them, and then out on our YouTube area, I'll actually post the YouTube or the recordings of these sessions. I'm not going to do that today because you guys paid for this session, but I will send you a recording, however horrible it may be with some of my mess-ups with printing. But I'll send you that, and I'll send you the link to PowerPoint. But I would like you guys to either ask questions or take a few minutes right now while I'm on the phone and just look in your system and see that you can get to all of these fields, or, you know, try something out for yourself. Can you find everything okay? You know, do you need any assistance with some of the screens? So I'm going to hang on, but I would love for you to go into, you know, the couple things. So if you're in the new version, I'd love for you to go into utilities and kind of, you know, try it either in a test company or with one of your vendors that you need to fix for, you know, one that you've set up wrong, or go into transactions, scroll down to the bottom and go to edit 1099 and pull up a vendor, and just, you can go in here and just close the window and not change anything, but you can see what transactions are out there. Or if you're in a, you know, older version, go into summary and see about changing, as I think Carlos did. What else could you change? Oh, and then the smart list. I would love for you to go into smart list and try to create a smart list with the information that I mentioned, with the missing tax IDs, and creating a smart list for yourself, and even putting. Anybody have a question? I thought I heard somebody start to talk.
Can you print 1096 forms on GP 2010?
No.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah. So the only thing I could think of is so you can't print the forms, but you could print like a smart list with the information, but you can't print the actual forms. I think you're going to have to manually do those.
Okay. Thank you.
Because, yeah, and, you know, if it was something that you're doing for many hundreds of vendors, we could look at creating a report in Report Writer. Now that I'm thinking that through, I have not had anybody really ask for it, so I haven't considered it, but let's just look for a second here.
It's not that bad. I don't have that many vendors. I could
Okay.
get away with doing it manually. Thank you.
Okay. No worries.
Right.
I had two quick questions.
Sure.
One of them being, when is the kind of the point of no return before you can keep editing the amounts to the 1099s? Is that when you reconcile?
Well, okay. So first, what version are you on?
2015.
Okay. So that means that the changes that you make, it doesn't matter when you make them. If you, and I'm glad you asked this question. If you make the changes through these screens, the new screens, it's okay if you reconcile. It's totally fine because it will keep those changes. It's writing those to the detail records. So I should have said that. I'm really glad you asked the question. So if you're doing either that screen or this screen with updating, you can run reconcile anytime you want. The change that I was saying would get rewritten over is if you did it in this summary area, which is just changing a box. It's not changing any detail information. So if you're not doing that, if you're changing it through the new methods, you can run reconcile anytime you want. So then the point of no return is just, oh, I'm going to print it right now. So yeah,
so
great question.
So if we do the other way where you go by month and you put in the amount, that's
the one.
And that doesn't work, right?
Right. If you do that, then don't run reconcile before you run your 1099s. Wait to run reconcile until after you've done your 1099s. Yeah.
I had a few people go in and change them over the weekend after I already did the reconcile. So
oh, good. After you, no, but after you did the reconcile is okay, right?
Yeah, they went in and changed after I reconciled.
Then they're still there. Those changes are still there.
Okay.
Yeah, so you're okay. And then I would encourage you, if you're running 2015, to do it the other way, right? Yeah. Because then, but you might not have known about it because it's new.
Yeah. No, that's fine. My other question is, we have several single-member LLCs, and they have to be reported together on one 1099. Is there any way to combine different GP companies?
So, So unfortunately, there's not within GP, standard GP.
Okay.
I can ask, we actually had written a product called 1099, I want to say Anytime. I don't know if that's something else I'm trying to think of, but where Collins Computing, we've looked across different companies for the same tax registration ID number and combined vendors across companies. And so if you guys are really interested in that, I can look to see if we still have that available.
Okay.
But otherwise, I'd say no, and maybe your best bet is updating it through summary, and maybe that's why you're updating it through summary.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, we were just thinking, like, if we use the same vendor on 2 or 3 different companies, then we probably need to be able to print it at one time, which I think I could go in and just take the system out in a sense and change the amount and then change it back.
The 1099 amount? Yep. Yeah. That's probably what I would do at this point. Yeah, especially if it's just a couple of vendors.
Gotcha. Okay. No problem. Thank you.
Uh-huh. Great questions. Any more questions so far? Are you guys poking around your systems and seeing if you can do this? And like I said, it's totally fine to go in here and print and print and print over and over again. It doesn't hurt anything. Printing them for different years, previous years. And the big things that I would just say to remember is that you're, selecting single feed. I know in Dynamics, more and more we're getting the options to have these default to the way we want, but you'll notice every time I come in this screen, it's defaulting back to continuous. So make the single feed, or you probably won't be aligning correctly on the second sheet, and that you are changing this to whatever year you need to. Any other questions? No. So let me just come back out here and see who is still on here. But yeah, so I will send you guys the recording once I get it. I will send you my PowerPoint, and then feel free to ask me any questions. You know, if they're within the next few minutes, I'll just put it as part of the webcast, because really I slotted a couple hours in case you guys had more questions, and I kind of sped through some things. So if you want to create your smart list and it's not working for you, let me know and I'll assist you with that. But I'll send you my PowerPoint in just a couple minutes, so you'll get that, and then I'll send you the webcast later on. So thank you guys very much for attending.